All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first session of our webinar series, this 2024. My name is Enzo Martelli. I'm part of the organizational team of the webinar series, and I have a brief announcement before we start with this first session. In behalf of our board, I want to invite all the attendees to consider sharing their experiences and research related to whitebark pine and other high-fi elevation white pines in the biannual newsletter, Nutcracker Notes. This is a great opportunity for researchers, restoration practitioners, and students like me and many of our attendees to share their study findings, including initial findings, commentaries, or news items relating to high elevation 5-needle pines. Another great advantage of this platform is that its format uses an informal or at least a relatively non-technical style for our rather broad audience, making it more accessible to both authors and readers. Further information on the article format and submission guidelines can be found at the Resources tab on the official webpage of the Foundation that I'll also leave in the chat box. And without further ado, thank you for your time, and I'll leave you with Lou and Brian, who is our today's speaker.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for coming. As Enzo said, my name is Lou Deloise. I'm a PhD student in Danielle Ulrich's lab at Montana State University, and I am co-organizing this webinar with Laurel Sindwald, a recent PhD graduate from Diana Tombach's Forest Ecology Lab at CU Denver, and Enzo Martelli Moya, a PhD student in Karen Nelson's lab at the University of Montana. If you missed any of our previous installments, you can find the recordings of the talks on our YouTube channel. The link for that I will put in the chat as soon as I'm done introducing our speaker today. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Brian Smithers. Dr. Brian Smithers is currently an assistant research and teaching professor at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana, where he studies montane plant community ecology, focusing on Great Basin bristlecone pine, limber pine, and whitebark pine communities, as well as mountaintop plant community ecology. He conducts research in partnership with the National Park Service Inventory and Monitoring Network and the U.S. Forest Service. Dr. Smithers received his PhD in ecology from the University of California, Davis, where he studied Great Basin treeline tree population dynamics, and his Master's of Science in Tropical Biology from James Cook University in Cairns, Australia, where he studied chick rearing behavior in tropical seabirds. He received his undergraduate degrees in Biology and Theological Studies from Loyola Marymount University. Dr. Smithers serves as the executive director for the nonprofit organization GLORIA Great Basin, which supports research in mountaintop communities throughout the Intermountain West. This research is part of the international GLORIA effort that examines long-term alpine plant community response to climate change. GLORIA Great Basin brings together teams of academics, agency scientists, students, and citizen scientists to conduct surveys all over the Intermountain West and is actively working to promote diversity in field ecology. He is also a new board member of the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, which is really exciting. If anyone has any questions for Brian, please type them into the chat or wait and virtually raise your hand at the end of the talk so that Enzo can enable you to use your microphone. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian.
Wonderful. I am not able to share my screen just yet, so maybe Enzo, you could turn that on for me. But thanks y'all for having me. I do appreciate the chance to talk about some of the stuff I'm working on. This will be a bit of a talk that's more things I'd like to do, things I'm hoping to do and or working on than certainly more so than completed completed work, but I think it'll be fun either way. Is this showing up okay? All right, awesome. So as the title that I gave that this talk would be, that was advertised, turned out to not be the talk I'm really going to give today, but I didn't include it. There'll be a little bit about it kind of towards the end, predicting subalpine forests from drones and space. But really, in the process of creating this talk, what it really ended up being was, how concerned we should be about some other 5-needle pine species besides or in addition to whitebark pine. Lou did a great job introducing me, and I appreciate that. So I'll very briefly just who I am. You heard the gist of it. I just want to point out that my career path was a winding path, taking a couple of stops, doing some tropical ecology and marine biology, and that for those maybe earlier in their careers, a little bit of academic wandering is totally fine, and it's totally fine to change what you're working on. I certainly did, and I'm glad I did. Also want to just give a plug, as Lou did. Thank you for that. For GLORIA Great Basin, we have participatory citizen science projects all over the West, and this year we'll be in Death Valley National Park, Great Basin National Park, and in the White Mountains in California, which is where I'm sitting right there in that photo. And we'd love to have your help. We do botanical monitoring of literal mountain tops to look at long-term plant community change on those mountain tops in response to climate change. It's a lot of fun. You can, by getting that QR code, that'll take you straight to our website if you wanted to learn more about that. Just wanted to thank some of some folks who I work closely with, who I'm working with now on this project, some partner agencies, some national forests, the Inyo and the Humboldt-Teabi, Death Valley National Park, the U.S. Forest Service Forest Health Program in GLORIA Great Basin. And collaborators on this project include folks like Barbara Bentz. She's with that Forest Health Program with the Forest Service. Michael Kuntz, it's Vibrant Planet. Sorry about that typo there. Vibram is, I think, the nice soles on your shoes. David Toma with the National Park Service, and Steve Heisman, a grad student here at Montana State University. So, we've been conditioned, partly by the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation and others. Trying to move this out of the way so I can see. Here we go. That we should very much be concerned about whitebark pine, and this is true. Of course, whitebark pine is a threatened species. It has been for a year now, but it's been in trouble for a good long time. We're all familiar, of course, with the issues of ghost forests and mass mortality. We're all the slide before showing a video of a Clark's nutcracker tearing through a cone. We're all definitely concerned about whitebark pine. But there are some other species that fit, really similarly to whitebark pine, fit this habitat, fit this high elevation 5-needle pine, that are also, we also may really want to be concerned about. This is just a range map showing whitebark pine's range. The blue colors is the whitebark pine range, but there's a couple of other species on here. This is an image created by a now PhD student, but he was an undergrad student working with Danielle Ulrich and myself here at Montana State that he put together, showing the limber pine range and also the Pinus longeva, the Great Basin bristlecone pine range. You'll notice that limber pine and whitebark pine, they share a lot of habitat, or they have contiguous distributions between the two of them, but also that whitebark pine goes a little further north, limber pine goes a little further south, and can in many ways be thought of as ecological surrogates, although it's not always true. With limber pine can grow in a variety of different habitats. Great Basin bristlecone pine grows in these really isolated pockets. It's this yellow color here. I just kind of circle some of them. There's the White Mountains. There's the Snake Range right there. It goes all the way over to central Utah, the Uinta Range there. and the Wasatch Front, where you'll find Great Basin bristlecone pine. But it's got it's really small, isolated population patches that make it a very different kind of species than you see with these broad scale distributions of those other two species. And in fact, there are a bunch of five-needle pine species that we have in Western North America. At the top left there is right there, that's our whitebark pine, but surrounding the whitebark pine, we've got limber pine and southwestern white pine, something we don't talk much about. That's it might actually just be a southern population of limber pine. They're closely related. In the Sierra Nevada, we've got the massive sugar pines. I grew up in a sugar pine forest in the Sierra Nevada. We've got, see, Rocky Mountain bristlecone. Hang on a second. Moving. Oh, Western white pine right there. You all have that up your way if you're in Missoula. We don't have it down here, but another five-needle pine. And then those three photos on the right, Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine, Great Basin bristlecone pine, and foxtail pine are also five-needle pines. Now, we have a bad habit of calling all of these species white pines. High five or five-needle pines. We just sort of synonymously call them white pines. But I'm just gonna talk about a couple of these today. But it's really important that we recognize some key differences among the two major groups. I'm sorry if this gets into the weeds a little bit, but I think it's kind of important. First of all, the genus Pinus is subdivided into two subgenera. Subgenus Pinus, which goes off into section Trifoliae and section Pinus. That includes things like ponderosa pine in that subsection Ponderosae. Subsection Contortae includes lodgepole pine. So a lot of our 3- and 2-needle pines find their way in that subgenus. Subgenus Strobus includes these two other groups, section Quinquifolia and section Pariae, or Perriae. And it's here that we have, and by the way, that these two groups include the five-needle pines, but also include the pinyon pines, which we don't think of as being super closely related to, our five-needle pines. Going to Quinquifolia, it has a bunch of things we're not super concerned about for the time being. So, section Perriae includes this subsection Valforiinae. That's where you find, I'm going to move my screen a little bit here, things like Pilo and Pyar are bristlecone pines, also foxtail pine. So we're way down here at this point for those five-needle pines. Our other five-needle pines are in this section Quinquifolia and in the subsection Strobus here. That is where you find limber pine, sugar pine, Pinus albicollis, our whitebark pine. And you'll notice these are not that closely related, these two sections. And in fact, there are lots of weirdo things in there. For example, it looks like bristlecone pines are more closely related to the pinyon pines, which are in this subsection Sembroides, than they are to something like limber pine or whitebark pine. And yet we've still called those all white pines, or some have. And I think that's a problem. They all do appear to be to have some issues with things like blister rust or pine beetles, but their actual responses aren't the same. And I think this is important because how we manage for one of those groups may not be the same as how we manage for others. Their effects across the phylogeny are not equal, not by a good stretch. For example, this is a little study looking at whitebark pine resistance to, species resistance to whitebark pine. white pine blister rust, excuse me. And even here in the name, you find, it's called white pine blister rust. And yet, I'm telling you right now, bristlecone pine is not a white pine. And yet it does have some susceptibility to blister rust, but it's not the same. Both species have some susceptibility, but it turned out, at least in this study, that it really depended on how densely it was inoculated. Limber pine, it really didn't matter. You put a little blister rust on it, it got blister rust. But bristlecone pine, really, it delayed the onset of infection, and also delayed how many trees, or the proportion of trees, got blister rust based on that, but by how dense the inoculation was. We know that, for example, some white pines, limber pine and whitebark pine, sugar pine and Pinus monticola, his name's escaping me, have this major gene resistance. It's been found throughout that whole group. That same major gene resistance has not been found in the whole group, including the bristlecone pines and including foxtail pine. And in fact, there, just some anecdotal evidence. A researcher I was working with the Forest Service for a little bit, Det Vogler, who retired a number of years ago, he was inoculating bristlecone pine and limber pine with blister rust, and found that while bristlecone pine did appear to get infected, even the young trees had some ability to wall off that infection. It didn't appear to be spreading throughout the whole tree. We know, of course, that even within something like limber pine, this is whitebark pine here, sorry, there's variable resistance. These are some of the symptoms you might find in whitebark pine. You can see in this upper left image, there's this kind of that spotting on the leaves and the cankers that are being formed in the young on the photo below. But there is some resistance. And maybe this photo isn't great, actually, when I'm looking at it here. But what we're looking at is, actually, we'll call this 1 here and 2 here. We're looking at 2 different individual trees there, even though it looks like they're the same. One having, evidently, they had all been exposed to blister rust, and the tree number 1 there is full of cankers on there, and tree number 2 is not. So it's got some resistance going there. And in fact, there's very little evidence for resistance in certain species. We'll get to that in just a second. Interestingly, there appears to be some provenance variation in resistance. So where a study looking at, by King et al. 2018, looking at what population of Pinus monticola collected individuals or samples from individuals from a number of different populations. And what they found was that the closer that population was to Vancouver, the more resistance there was in natural populations, which should make sense if you know the history of infection, that blister rust came into North America through the port of Vancouver in the early 1900s, and has been spreading south and east since then. And so those populations closer to Vancouver, probably a lot of the trees have died, or not probably, they have died, that didn't have some sort of resistance. And so it's left on the landscape trees that do have higher levels of resistance. So as I said in this section, strobus, so Great Basin bristlecone pine, Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine, foxtail pine, we haven't found this major gene resistance. There appears to be some other resistance. I mentioned there's very little, so far, there's been very, very little documented infection in any of these species in the wild, in nature. There is one the first documented case in any of these came in 2003 in southern Colorado, where one individual bristlecone pine, Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine, was infected. It was the only one in the whole area, and it was surrounded by limber pine that were heavily infected. Since then, there have been other, that was a published report. There have been other, things we've heard, but really hasn't been an issue in those three species. And there are lots of competing theories as to why this might be. Some of those theories have more to do with the climate than they do with the trees. So perhaps that it's where you find Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine and Great Basin bristlecone pine, perhaps it's too dry to transmit the spores, and is keeping transmission down. I don't know about, the jury's out on that, we'll say. So looking at those bristlecone pines, we've got Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine, really just found in Colorado, northern New Mexico, and then there's one teeny tiny isolated population in the San Francisco Peaks in northern Arizona, just outside of Flagstaff. Great Basin bristlecone pine, which is found between central Utah in the east, all the way to the west. The far west it goes is to the White Mountains in California. I'm looking at this map. It looks like it's saying some of the populations in the Panamints or Inos are a little further west, but basically does not reach the Sierra Nevada in California. And then foxtail pine, another closely related species, has it's got this really weird distribution, two isolated populations. What's it doing that? There we go. One in the Siskiyou Mountains in Northern California, another in the Southern Sierra. All three of these are really closely related. There are those who would say that perhaps they're actually just three populations, or they're all just populations of the same species. That can be debated. But they're all sort of in these isolated populations, especially foxtail pine. But you'll notice that they're all sort of separated and in these non-contiguous populations, and are really relics of time gone by, when in colder periods, all of these trees were in lower areas in more connected habitats, but have moved up and up into isolated mountain ranges that are tall enough to support them in response to warming climate, really since the ice ages. To zoom in on a couple of these species that I've worked closely with, limber pine and Great Basin bristlecone pine, I've been looking at the relationship between these two species in the Great Basin for kind of a while, because well, they're just really cool, but also they're a nice proxy to look at how species are moving around the landscape in response to climate change. These two species do share a good amount of overlap. You can see that in this in those species distribution maps in the bottom. They're a little bit small, but you can see that there, that really in the Great Basin, they share a lot of overlap. Certainly by elevation range, they overlap. But they've got some really key differences. Limber pine have those large seeds that are they're enjoyed by Clark's nutcracker, who there's no whitebark pine in the Great Basin, or at least not the southern part of the Great Basin. And so Clark's nutcracker feed on limber pine seeds. Great Basin bristlecone pine have these little seeds that are winged and are mostly dispersed by wind. They've got some soil differences, but they're both found at or near tree line. And I found a number of years ago, or I was noticing a lot of young limber pine trees where bristlecone pine adults really dominate the stand. What you're looking at here, all those young trees in the front are young limber pines, and all the big trees in the back are adult bristlecone pines. And often you see that you kind of see this all over the Great Basin, where you're not really seeing very many young bristlecone pines at all, even where, and you are seeing a lot of limber pine, even where there are very few limber pine adults. To take it to an extreme, this is a really neat spot in the White Mountains, where this is right at tree line, about 12,500 feet, a little below that maybe, on a kind of a northwest facing aspect, where a lot of big old bristlecone trees died. We think maybe in the Little Ice Age, even in the 1800, prior to about 1850. Mass mortality of this entire stand of bristlecone pine. And now trees that are 50 years or less have really started to take over just recently, probably in response to warming climate, but they are almost entirely limber pine in a spot that was dominated by bristlecone pine. And so this got me kind of thinking, like, gosh, is this isolated here? Is this an issue all over the Great Basin? So I did set off, as part of my PhD work, set off all over the Great Basin to see if this kind of thing is happening all over. Just give you just one image from that period. What we're looking at here are bristlecone are densities of adults on the top and juveniles on the bottom, different measures of density on a couple of different soil types. And just looking at bristlecone pine first, so that's kind of this column there. You see that bristlecone pine really likes those dolomite and limestones, those calcareous soils. The adults thrive on them, and you see that the juveniles do more or less the same. Where you have adults, you have young. Duh, right? That kind of makes sense. But limber pine is kind of funny. This is below tree line once again. Pretty much the only place you see limber pine in really great densities at tree line is on granitic soils, which generally exclude bristlecone pine. They don't really like it. And so you get a lot of adults there. But looking at the juveniles, they're all over the place. Limber pine juveniles are on all soil types doing quite well and generally competing quite well with bristlecone pine. This is below tree line. When we look above tree line, that trend goes off the rails. First of all, looking at tree line adult basal area, limber pine is generally a minor player at tree line. It does better on granitic and quartzite soils than it does on those calcareous soils. Bristlecone pine dominates on those calcareous soils. You'll notice, a bit of a relationship with bristlecone pine where you have adults, you have young, but limber pine are everywhere in great numbers, especially on this dolomite soil type where you don't really even find adults. And so this got me really concerned about the future of bristlecone pine, Great Basin bristlecone pine, if perhaps that limber pine is really taking over. The why question, I think, is fairly simple. It's got this great disperser, right? It's got Clark's nutcracker harvesting those cones, harvesting those seeds, transporting them all over the landscape, planting them at an ideal depth. And bristlecone pine just doesn't have it. It just doesn't have that dispersal advantage. And that got me really thinking about winners and losers in response to climate change. This is really some debate could be made about whether the speed of this climate change is unprecedented, but it's fast. And so species that are able to take advantage of fast climate change may be better adapted to deal with climate change. There may be winners and losers. And in this case, gosh, it sure does seem like limber pine might be a winner. It's more adaptable. It can handle a broader range of conditions. It's got this great dispersal agent. And maybe we should be concerned about Great Basin bristlecone pine. But to get to bristlecone pine, to think about this, to get rid of a tree is, to have regeneration happen is one thing, but to make a tree die is another. These are two images that I am so proud of myself. I handily created with the help of AI. I typed into, some version of whichever one it was. I think it was the Bing one. I want a picture of a bristlecone pine being struck by lightning, and then another one falling over, because these prior, to a couple of years ago, the only thing we knew of that killed bristlecone pines, they live forever, by the way. Essentially, the oldest individuals are over 5,000 years old. The only thing that kills them is if they get hit by lightning and burn down, or if the land literally erodes from underneath them and they fall over. There is no, there hasn't been any evidence of disease or pests resulting in mortality. Really, they exist on these geological timescales. They play the long game. And so perhaps I was being a little short-sighted in thinking that limber pine is going to take over the world. In not thinking about, well, all it takes is a couple of bristlecone pines getting in there, and perhaps those will outcompete. At the same time, there is evidence that bristlecone pines in the past have died en masse. That spot I was showing you in the White Mountains, where that whole stand appears to have died more or less at the same time. We just don't really have a modern example of this happening, so we don't know why or when it happens. which is why I was surprised in 2016, right in the middle of that California mega drought, when on the other side of this ridge of the picture you're looking at here, I saw this dead tree, which I knew to be alive the year before. It was the first time I'd seen in many years of running around these mountains, the first time I'd seen a tree that had just up and died. And I thought, well, that's weird. And, the exception that proves the rule. Evidently, it can happen that a tree can just up and die. And then I was doing some GLORIA work in Telescope Peak, or on Telescope Peak in Death Valley National Park, which does have high mountains. And you'll notice some dead canopy there. So I was even more surprised when working in Telescope Peak when I saw a whole bunch of dead Great Basin bristlecone pines, once again, right after this unprecedented hot drought of the mid-2010s. And so working with some collaborators got in there to look more systematically, and it was widespread mortality. The place was full of dead bristlecone pines that no one had, and we had never, ever seen this. And it got a lot of people up in arms. So of course, it's not the first time that this has happened. There have been these surprise mass mortality events. This is going back to Brashears et al. 2005. This kind of first of its kind, this huge mortality event of Pinus edulis. What is that color? Whatever, the two needle pinyon pine. Can't remember what that, Rocky Mountain pinyon, Colorado pinyon, something like that. Where basically the entire population in parts died in quick response to back-to-back severe hot drought years, resulting in this photo. Basically, everything you see that's brown is a pinyon pine. Everything you see is green is a juniper. And this is kind of the end of pinyon pine in this area, as far as we know, at least for the near term. This is happening at the southern range edge of pinyon pine, which makes sense. If you think about climate change and range shifts, you've got things moving north, but you also have contraction at the southern end. And this is what it looks like, right? It may not happen one tree at a time. It may happen pretty quickly. Thinking about bristlecone pine, if you were to pick a spot where you might see the same kind of thing, this range contraction kind of mortality events or mass mortality events resulting in range contraction, you couldn't do a whole lot better than Telescope Peak, which is right there. It's in Death Valley National Park. It's in the Panamint Range, which is behind a pretty two rain shadows, but one of them being very significantly the Southern Sierra, which are quite tall, 14,000 feet. Telescope Peak is very dry. It's literally in Death Valley National Park. And so if you were to say, like, where are we going to start seeing range contraction? Well, that'd be pretty high on my list. You might also be looking, here in the spring of the Sheep Mountains as being, those southern range populations. And in fact, we've been looking at this with a grad student here at MSU, Stephen Heisman, looking at the climate parameters of this. The Panamint Range here is this Telescope Peak site. So it's comparing all of these box plot graphs are comparing the Death Valley site in the Panamint Range to all of the other bristlecone pine sites. And you'll see that Panamint Range has a lower average AET than the average site, has higher CWD, lower average soil water, lower snow water equivalent, and higher average temperatures than your average site. When you look at how those have changed from 2006 to, the period from 2006, 2011 to 2012, 2017, when that hot drought was, not only is it generally hotter and drier, but it got even hotter and drier in that short period. So perhaps more telling, the change in these parameters was higher in the Panamint Range than in elsewhere. And so just looking at what we think are maybe two of the really important ones, the AET and the CWD, the green here, those green arrows are directional change from the 2006, 2011 period to the 2012, 2017 period. The green arrows are the Panamint Range. And what you see is hopefully you see a couple of things. By the way, there was some other smaller and less extensive mortality that also was found in a couple other places, the Hot Creek Range, the Silver Peak Range, and the Wawa Mountains. But just to focus on where we had that mass mortality in the Panamint Range in Death Valley on Telescope Peak, it's those green arrows. And what you should notice right away before you even look at, how those arrows are pointing, that those are all clusters down here at the bottom where you have both the highest CWD and the lowest AET. This is among, and each of those arrows represents a site where bristlecone pine is found. This is pretty much, at least according to CWD, the hottest site around, or the driest site around, sorry. And it appears to have gotten even drier. You can see those arrows pointing kind of up and to the right. That means its AET may be going up a little bit, but it is getting even drier, so even higher CWD. Hopefully you're asking the question, well, what killed them? It doesn't drought. They lived through drought. We've got maybe some examples of cold killing trees, but what actually did the deed? And this is always tricky because it's really hard to tell what kills a tree. But there are some smoking guns. Hot dry itself rarely kills a tree. Usually it just weakens it for other players. And in this case, Barbara Benson and collaborators went out, tore back the bark, and looked at the galleries, and sure enough, found evidence of mountain pine beetle, Dendroctonus beetles. Generally speaking, this is not a major player in bristlecone pine. In fact, Barbara Benson herself has a paper from 2016 explaining why bristlecone pine is impervious to mountain pine beetle. On the left, there's two images there. On the left, we're looking at a chamber from a limber pine, which is pretty standard. We've got this, the bark beetle gets in there, and the female chews her way through the wood. While she's doing that, she's depositing eggs all along here. Those eggs hatch, they turn into larvae, and the larvae will dig through perpendicular to that gallery. And as they're chewing through, they're growing, they're getting bigger, they're pupating, and eventually they become adults themselves, and they emerge from that tree to go infect other trees. Well, interestingly, and this is harder to see in the other image, what they found in bristlecone pine was that they do have these adult, and here's one, for example, going up. They do have these adult adult galleries going up, and you can see these, and so like I said, it's hard to see, and I'm just kind of drawing lines randomly on here, that you can see these brood galleries going out perpendicular, but you don't see brood adult emergence. They died. The young beetles died in the tree. So it appears that bristlecone pine is actually acting as a sink for these beetles. The adults get in there, the young start chewing, but they can't chew through the wood. Maybe the wood is too dense. There are some terpenes they don't like, and they die. So it's not a great place for mountain pine beetles. Some other data to go with that. You've got bristlecone pine showing very low adult emergence compared to limber pine. The gallery lengths, the egg gallery lengths, so the brood, the young, are much shorter in bristlecone pine than they are in limber pine. And then adult emergence is basically zero. That's what this orange line is here. So the brood are not making it to adulthood to emerge. The limber pine adults are. What we think was happening then is that it got so hot and dry there that that bark beetles were able to just absolutely infest limber pine and go nuts. And there's a lot of limber pine dead in there. And there were so many beetles because, once they get in there and they start reproducing, now there are more beetles, and those beetles get in there and reproduce. Now there are even more beetles, that once they get to a certain critical size, they start spilling over into less ideal species like Pinus longeva, like bristlecone pine. So the adults aren't emerging from bristlecone pine, but they're still getting in there enough to kill the trees. Even just digging those galleries, you're girdling the tree, and if you get enough in there, it will kill those trees. So this hot drought meant mass mortality of limber, and as a byproduct, there was just this spillover to the Great Basin bristlecone pine. Now, limber pine is, back to limber pine. It does some things really well. It can grow at low elevations. It can grow at high elevations. It's really adaptable. It's really hardy, but it is susceptible to mountain pine beetle. It's found, this geographic range is kind of amazing. In fact, if southwestern white pine and limber pine are really the same species, it goes right down into northern Mexico. It's often a pioneer species. You find it, kind of at lower tree line in the north, but lower tree line all the way up to the montane zone in the north. But in the southern part of its range, it's just the upper tree line. We wanted to know, are there other examples of this kind of mortality, mass mortality of limber pine that didn't spill over into bristlecone pine, to kind of figure out some parameters around where we should be concerned next about about mortality. And we found a spot in the Snake Range, which is right here on the edge of eastern Nevada. The northern Snake Range is a mountain called Mount Moriah. Pretty much, is it my favorite spot in the Great Basin? It's really high up there. It is stunningly beautiful. Top is a shot of Mount Moriah taken kind of from the just about the table, so kind of from the north, a little bit from the northwest. It's got these, below the peak, it's got these enormous contiguous areas of subalpine, Great Basin bristlecone pine, limber pine, and Engelmann spruce forest. The bottom photo is taken from Wheeler Peak, looking at some of that forest. From Mount Moriah, looking at Wheeler Peak in Great Basin National Park. And you can see that contiguous forest. This is one of my favorite study sites back in 2014 and 2016 because it was such a healthy forest. Well, it's not anymore. There has been a bunch of mortality. I heard reports of this mortality, and we got down there, and sure enough, a lot of limber pine mortality, but not much bristlecone pine mortality. And we really wanted to get a landscape perspective on this. This is hard to do, going out to do it on foot, right? Putting in plots, and you can sample this way. Another problem, we wanted to get into Telescope Peak to look at what the mortality looks like between the species. And there, it's just all cliffs and things. It's almost impossible to get around there. And so, what do we do about this? How do we sample these lands that are perhaps either too big or too dangerous? Well, enter the humble drone, the mighty drone. A couple $1,000 gets you this particular drone. The problem is you can't currently fly drones in national parks. Their rules don't allow for it. They're being developed now about what kind of drones you might be able to fly, but we wanted to kind of try this out, and so got some money together to get a smaller, cheaper drone that we know can't fly in the national park or won't be able to. It's because it's made in China. That's rule number one is if your drone is made in China, it will not fly in the national park. But of course, all the cheaper drones are cheap and high quality drones are made in China right now. We went out to Mount Moriah. This was just last August. I think it was August, maybe September. That's grad student Stephen Heisman in the foreground there, and collaborator Michael Kuntz from Vibrant Planet and University of Colorado Boulder there, getting that sucker ready to go. Here we have some lift off, and this is so slick. You can pre-program these flight patterns, and it does its thing. It just flies back and forth, just taking photo after photo. It comes back, you swap a battery, you throw it back out there, and so it's just taking photo after photo. We have literally tens of thousands of photos of a really large area. It's just a kind of a subset of those. Zooming into one. And of course, looking at one of these photos, you can see the mortality. You can see live and dead trees, but hopefully some of you will also notice that there's some color differences among the trees. The lighter kind of gray-green color are limber pine, and the darker green color are bristlecone pine. And given that we can see the differences in these images, we can certainly train models through AI to tell the difference. So, that's where we're going with this. We did put in some plots in this area to literally mark, okay, this is a limber pine, this is a bristlecone pine, this is a dead bristlecone pine, this is a lot, and get a lot of that data to help train the model. And so we're working on that kind of stuff right now to train the model up so that we can then just pump our images through to get real species composition data. And what you can also do then is stitch these photos together and create these amazing 3D models of a forest stand. This one here is from the Sierra Nevada that my collaborator Michael Kuntz put together from some other work. But you can create these amazing 3D models that are actually photos. This isn't those aren't fake trees. Those are photos of trees that we can now manipulate in three-dimensional space and see the live trees, the dead trees. We're really excited about this. Now, I want to point out two things. Number one, drones are awesome. Basically, we put the drone up in the sky, and then Mike, Steven, and I sat around and solved all the world's problems while the drone did all the work. But even with that, this was still a pain. To get to the site it's in the middle of nowhere, really bad roads. It's a lot of equipment. Getting to the site, it's hours over bad roads. I want to point out the clouds behind that drone. That was the front end of Hurricane Hillary, which you may remember was the first hurricane to hit Los Angeles and San Diego in recorded history. It ultimately chased us out of there. We had to abandon ship. Poor Steven lost his tent, literally lost it, but somewhere in, who knows where it is now. It's probably stuck in a tree in Utah by now. So field work is hard. And so one thing we're hoping to do is, once we've used on the ground data to train our drone model, use that drone model to train space imagery. This is the Landsat satellite there up in the upper left, which does a really nice job using NDVI of forests, which is that measure of greenness. And so being able to match up our drone data with that Landsat data, could be NDVI or other metrics. We may be able to get down to, on a daily basis, or essentially pretty close to a daily basis, looking at tree health, tree mortality, what species are dying and where. So we're super excited about this. And that's, it's where we're going in a lot of these large landscape kinds of questions. And we talk a lot regionally in this area about these trees and their effect in our mountains. But I just want to point out that this guy up there, maybe some of you know what this is. The shape should look familiar to you, although the color might be making you curious. This is a Eurasian nutcracker. There are nutcrackers all over the northern hemisphere. There are a couple of different species. There's the Eurasian, there's the spotted in Eastern Asia, the large spotted, which I think is a subspecies in the Himalaya, who have the very same interaction with different species of white pines in those areas. These are global issues that we're working on here. And so since we're, as I backed out and we're looking at the globe from satellites and from space and looking at this all spatially from this big perspective, it's important to recognize that how whitebark pine, how limber pine, how bristlecone pine go, so do the world's trees. And so these questions we can really look at a global scale. So I went longer than I thought I would, but hopefully there's some time for questions. I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions now or after if we run out of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that great talk. We do have about 8 minutes for questions, and I see that there are 2 attendees with their hands raised. So maybe we'll start with them, and Enzo can go ahead and unmute them, and you all can ask your question live. And then if we still have time, I'll read off some of the questions in the comments.
Right away, Lou, we're going to start with Thomas Hender.
And Thomas, you're muted.
That would have been an accident, sorry.
There we go. Hey, Thomas.
I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, that's your raised. All right, great.
No worries, Thomas. We can move on to the next one. So the next one is Jeremiah Roth. And Jeremiah, you're also muted as well.
Well, maybe we'd better hop to the other questions and see if Jeremiah can get his.
Yeah, if he jumps in the middle.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll go ahead and read some of the questions from the chat.
Cool.
Okay, Jessica Mann would like to know where the Eurasian Nutcracker photo was taken.
Oh, that's a great. I did not take that photo. I didn't even credit it appropriately. That is almost certainly from Eastern Europe. But I do not know. I literally stole that photo this morning from the internet. I did some bad attribution there.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
Sorry. That's a disappointment, Jessica. I'm sorry.
Okay, the next question is from Greg Danito, who is wondering, was the blue stain observed in bristlecone that were attacked by mountain pine beetle?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. Geez, and I don't know if you can really tell blue stain without getting into the wood. I don't know how well you can see it on the surface. And we certainly didn't go cutting down bristlecone pines. People don't like it when you do that. So that is a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I guess I was making the assumption there that it was the brood galleries that girdled the tree, but we do know, of course, that blue stain fungus that the pine beetles bring in can be the causal agent of death as well. Great question, and I'm sorry I don't have a good answer for that.
Great, thanks again, Brian. The next question is from Joe Rizzi, and they are wondering if fire exclusion, forest succession, and lack of region play a role in mountain pine beetle mortality as well as the changing conditions.
Certainly. That's certainly true across the West. How true that is in these subalpine forests, I think, is up for debate. These are really high, especially in the Great Basin. These are really high and dry forests, and they're really woodlands with not a lot of contiguous fuels. Fire is really rare in these systems. It's not absent. That's important to note that fire does happen. And certainly there would be this interplay between pine beetle and fire in that regard. But there's so little fuel to carry fire from tree to tree in most of these forests that even if there is, let's say there's a mass mortality event on the side of Telescope Peak, you've got a lot of standing dead trees. You still got to get fire, to move from spot to spot. And remember, this wood is really dense. It doesn't burn like a ponderosa pine or a lodgepole pine. This dense wood burns really slowly. You'll even a tree that gets hit by lightning, you can tell it smolders more than it really burns. Once again, not say it doesn't happen. There are some huge fires that have burned. One up in the Jarbidge in northern Nevada, one in the southern Snake Range that are massive sized fires. It's probably happening when you've got those crazy weather, years of dry coupled with huge wind events that can push fire through a canopy. But I just don't think we know enough in the subalpine forest, at least, enough to know what the relationship is between whitebark pine mortality and fire. We don't really know what that is here in our mortality with whitebark pine. And there's a lot of evidence to show that it really depends on when the fire comes. If there's a mortality event and you still have needles on the trees, and the fire comes then, it looks like that does increase fire. If it's even been 3-5 years, the needles have dropped, there's not a lot of fine fuels in the landscape, that mountain pine beetle mortality may result in lessened fire risk. So it's quite complicated.
Thanks, Brian, for elaborating on that question. We only have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. But we will share the comment section with Brian, and so if there are any comments that were unaddressed, then you all will be able to contact each other, and we'll get that contact information shared as well. Thank you so much, Brian, for that incredible talk. Our next webinar will be February 20th with Michelle Slayton presenting her work on the recent status of whitebark pine in California. And we hope to see you all for that webinar. And thank you again to everybody for attending.